Thank you all for being here today and for the stats training. I hope you all are having a wonderful night. The panelists today are Dave Scholler, who's our business analyst, Chris Tilla-Medley, who's the Washington East District Administrator, and myself, Tanya Bennett, who's the Frederick District Administrator. We are going to go ahead and start with Dave. Go ahead, Dave. Thank you.
All right. Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to our webinar, Statistical Reporting Training. And I'm glad you're all here and joining us, and hope you are well. Thanks for taking the time out of your evening to learn more about reporting statistics. And especially if you're new, we appreciate you taking the interest in doing this. It definitely will pay dividends for you and your church as you get into this process, and hopefully we will answer as many of your questions as we can as we're presenting, but please feel free to reach out to us in the, Tanya, are we doing Q&A or are we doing chat? Are we doing both?
We are doing Q&A.
Okay, so please use the Zoom Q&A tool to ask questions. Crystal will be monitoring questions when she's not presenting, and we'll answer them via chat as she can, and some of these we will answer live. And if we see a question is appropriate to an area that we are presenting in right then, we may interrupt the presenter and pose your question to them so that we can kind of give it back to you in context and help you out there. But for the majority of the questions, we'll hold the answers till the end and answer as much as we can. And we should have plenty of time left at the end for Q&A. And we'll wrap up. So with that said, I'll ask Tanya to queue up our presentation slides. All right. I can see.
You can see?
I can.
Okay, great.
Okay, so introductions. Tanya already took care of that for us. Obviously, as I mentioned, this is all about statistical reports, what we collect, how we collect it, why we collect it. We have a little overview of the timelines and the key dates, chat about accuracy. And then at that point in the presentation, we will break away from the PowerPoint, and Crystal will give you a live walkthrough actually in the EZRA stats reporting system and walk you through the steps that are required to log in for the first time, and then walk you through some of the basics about data entry and talk about some of the quirks about the data entry, some of the issues that pop up with warnings and explanations, and talk about some things that tend to trip people up along the way. After we get you up to speed on that, we will pop back to the PowerPoint, and I will talk about some of the high-level issues with each of the tables and jump into some of the specifics with some of the lines. Questions, again, if we see something pop up that's pertinent to what I'm covering, Crystal will probably interrupt me and say, hey, Dave, while you're there, we got a question. Otherwise, again, we'll chat about those at the end. And then as we're wrapping up, I will walk you through just some of the resources that we have online, and so that you can download those in advance and get up to speed on everything, and during the process as well. So with that said, we'll kick it off. All right, so presenters, I will skim over this as Tanya covered it already. District administrators, just for simplicity's sake, some of them are online with us, but they are hidden as presenters so that we can have a clean and easy to see screen. But you should know who all of your district administrators are. They are there. Some of them are in the background, like I said. Some of them are getting an early start on Christmas, but it's a list of district administrators there. So, stats reporting. So there's three main tables for stats reporting. Table 1 is all about membership and participation. Table 2 discusses and reports on church assets and all the expenses. Table 2 is usually where we spend a little bit more time because all the information that is reported there in one way or the other has to do with apportionments. And there's some core lines there that are actually used in the apportionment calculations. And table 3 is all on the income side of the equation for churches. And in addition to those 3 tables, we have a supplemental worksheet that will walk you through the process of taking some deductions for missional related utility expenses and how that feeds into the table 2 statistics. So annual conferences can add questions as they wish, but GCFA, which is the General Counsel on Finance and Administration, they ask us to maintain a core set of questions. They typically will update these once every 4 years, but we can add questions as we see fit that are more applicable to our conference. Thankfully, we only add a few for your sake. We think you have enough questions to ask, so we don't add too many. And then finally, just want to touch base and really kind of highlight that the statistical data is collected on the GCFA website. And again, Crystal will walk you through all that. So statistics, why are they important? So it's the old adage, you can't manage what you can't measure. And of course, the purpose of statistics and the requirement to report statistics, like everything else in the Methodist denomination, is covered in the Book of Discipline. There's the paragraph and page citation there if you want to take a look. But it just lets you know that all pastors must give an account of their annual statistics to their annual conference according to the forms. And this is just part of that entire process. You have already probably done your fair share of reporting already. We're just wrapping up the church conference season and also the evaluation and appointment season, where we've collected quite a bit of information, and really the statistical reports is coming in right at the tail end of that and wraps up the whole kind of data collection season, if you would, and gets all the statistics in that you may not have already addressed. So your statistical reports will be used for a variety of things. We look at, first and foremost, it's the best way for the conference to evaluate the vitality of your church. We can evaluate the needs of our churches individually, and then we can also see trends, might be in a district or might be in an area, so that we can provide resources to our conference, maybe provide grant programs, you name it, but this is how we spot the trends that will inform us in those areas. As the statistics are aggregated, we're looking at comparisons between congregations, and as they aggregate within annual conferences, the United Methodist Church is looking to see what's different about annual conferences. Obviously, this is one of the performance metrics for a bishop, how an annual conference is doing, especially in key areas such as professions of faith and membership growth and that type of thing. And then, as mentioned before, statistics are used to calculate your church's mission share, or if you've been around the block a few times, it's apportionment is the term we used to use a couple of years back. That's all calculated with mission share. So, and then finally, I already mentioned evaluations. Some of those vitality stats are used along with other factors to help the conference as we enter into the appointment season into the spring, to make decisions about congregations and to make decisions about pastoral appointments. Okay, so the quick overview, this is all part of a larger process that has to do with our budget. It kind of kicks off internally in September. We will send out surveys to pastors and church leaders. We have budgets that we send out internally to our departments to say, okay, for the upcoming budgetary year, what do you need as far as your mission programs, and how much do those programs cost, so we can start evaluating our needs internally. In December, we have what we're doing right now, which is statistical training. And then on December 16th specifically, which is today, the EZRA system opens for review and preparation. Obviously, you can't do a whole lot of end of year statistics until the end of the year happens. So, but you can at least get in there, you get your account set up, kick the tires, especially if you're new. Make sure you're just familiar with the system overall, and have everything ready to go as you collect and compile all of your end of year information. So January 1st is when you can start entering your data as you receive it. And the last few years, we have actually extended the period of time that you can have to put in the statistics. So we used to have, I think it was around 3 weeks, but now we're giving you the full month of January. So you have from January 1st through January 31st at midnight to get your statistical reports in, and that'll give you a little bit extra time. I know with COVID, some things process-wise are still a little bit delayed as people may not be fully back in the building. So this will hopefully ease some of the pressure there. So February, after the statistics are in, we will then go back out to you with a copy of what you submitted to us and give you a mechanism where you can report back to us any issues that you see, any errors that you're spotting. And this is a time when it's definitely best to let us know as right up front so that we can take action. Because as shown in the next bullet point, after we verify those statistics, we are then looking at a projection of how much income that translates into. And our Council on Finance and Administration is then looking at that projected income along with the needs and missional programs of the conference in order to see where we stand and where we may need to make some changes to the budget and get it in line with the income that we're expecting. Next slide. So people ask all the time, come on, is this really important? And the quick answer is yes. Again, for all the reasons that I just let you know about. It's very important for the conference. It's very important for your church. Really the best practice for stats reporting. These practices are a lot of common sense administrative office process type things throughout the year. Just obviously good planning and record keeping, care, concern, and honesty for the data that you're collecting. And then when you're putting your statistics in, really double checking your work. And I can't stress this enough, having someone else check your work. I've been doing this 11 years now, and almost without fail, when we get a last minute call or email from someone that says, oh my goodness, we completely messed up this statistic. We didn't realize it. Our mission share is going up. It's typically because one person was entrusted with the reporting of the statistics. Just like proofreading anything else, just have somebody else take a look at it. If it's your pastor, have a committee chair, finance chair, take a look at it. Just have somebody else look at your work. You'd be amazed, like anything else, what you catch after you stare at something long enough, you kind of get blind to simple errors, and it's just worth having somebody else check in. So not recommended fudging and wild guesses. We have folks that sometimes maybe have a long day and they're doing their statistics in the evening, and they can't figure out why they're getting a warning, and they may just put in some answers just to kind of get past that warning or get to the next page. And obviously that is not recommended. It can cause problems. We had one year where somebody got frustrated and put in a bunch of 9s, and it looked like whatever that statistic was for the conference went much higher that year until we realized that one church was putting in 9 million of whatever that thing happened to be, and really threw our numbers off. So please don't do that. And backing up your answers, we will talk about it some more, but Crystal will show you on the live demo. When you put in a number that varies quite a bit from the year prior or doesn't quite make sense in the context of what you're reporting, the system is programmed to flag that answer when you go to save it, and it will ask you just for an explanation. Really, it's just to help you identify that something might be wrong with the number, but if it is indeed correct, it will help us to have your explanation, because we will have the same reaction. We will say, hey, why is this up 30%? And if we have an explanation from you, it will help us know that you saw it, you recognize that it's something that looks strange, but there is an explanation for it. So that's backing up your answers, and that really helps us, and it will help you as well. We typically will get whatever we need from that explanation. If something we still doesn't make sense, we may go back to you and say, this is not making sense. Can we see a budget or something so that we can help you make sense of why this line is up so high? Often we will see somebody who's new reporting and they might be putting an expense in line A when it should be line B. So sometimes that will help us kind of get to the bottom of what's going on. Next slide. So verification. It's a little bit tough to see here, but there is a sample of this form online. But this is the overall look of what you will receive in February from us that will allow you to not only see the statistics for the current year, which is if you're looking at this sheet, the top right-hand column you see highlighted in yellow is the current year, but it will also show you the previous 2 years of information that you reported. The reason that we do that is very helpful to spot trends that may be off. In this case, the sample that we're showing, and the sample is also available online. Again, it's small here, but it's showing that the church on line 61 had a big spike in what they were reporting. It went from 82,000 to 148,000. And the result of that was the apportionment or mission share went up by 13%. So again, this is kind of a quick at a glance type of thing to say, hey, we were expecting our apportionment to stay flat or go down. What's going on? Why did it go up? This is the way that we allow you to kind of at a glance, take a look at everything and spot things quickly. And if you do spot something, you can come back to us and say, hey, line 61, we messed up. It shouldn't have been 148,000. It should have been this. So this is what the form will look like. And please keep an eye out for that in February, because again, we start putting together projections right after the period of time is over for correction requests. So please keep an eye out for it. We generally copy all kinds of people in your church, but this is what the form will look like. So keep an eye out for that in February. So Arena, every year we get questions about statistics. People will, they've been logging into Arena all year long for various events and for other functions. And they are ready to go in January, and they go to Arena and they look and look and look and look, and there are no statistic entry forms or screens or anything to be found. So the reason is it's not there. It is actually located in a separate system completely. That's hosted by the United Methodist Church, and the link for that is shown there, and it's ezra.gcfa.org. There's no www in front of it, and that will take you to the correct system, which is the statistical reporting system, again, which is not Arena. So keep that in mind. If you're in Arena and you can't figure out where everything is, you're just in the wrong spot. So with that said, again, as I mentioned before, we're going to break away from the PowerPoint and we will cut over to Crystal, and she will walk you through the live process of getting your account set up in EZRA and getting the data in.
Thank you, Dave. What we're going to do, as Dave has said, we're going to go to the EZRA website, which is ezra.gcfa.org. And I have to learn how to type. And then we're going to log in. Your number would begin with 3810, and it would include the church number, your 4-digit church number. In our case, we're going to use a test church. And then you have lowercase o or lowercase p. O would be for other, P would be for primary or pastor. In this case, we're going to use a P. Your password will be all lowercase, stat 2021. And then once logged in, you're going to be brought to this page. The important thing to look for here is that this is your church, because every church, when they first log in, is going to log in the way you did. 3810, their church number, lowercase o, lowercase p, and stats 2021. So in just one mistype, and they could accidentally log into the wrong account. So it's important that you make sure that this is your church whenever you log in. Once you're on this page, you're going to hit next, and you're going to type in your name. and your address, your email address. We need this information in case we have any questions so that we can contact you. Once that information is put in, we're going to hit next. And then you have to put in your current password, which again is lowercase, stats 2021, stats, STATS 2021. And then we ask that you change your password. It's important that once you change the password, you write down your password and you keep it with you. If someone else is helping you complete your stats, we ask that you're not both in the system at the same time, but they can either use a different login or you can provide your new password. In this case, we're going to keep stats 2021 since it's our test church. It says thank you. You may now begin using the system. You're going to click finish. Once you're on this page, you're going to see print blank report or begin entering my stats. We're going to begin with print blank report, which you could do as soon as they open. In this case, we're going to hit the church name and we're going to hit run report. And then you download the PDF. Once you download the PDF, you'll be able to open it. It will provide 2020's information and then blank 2021. So you can print that out and give that to those who need to give you information to upload into the system. Once you have that information, we're going to go back to Stats Home. And then you can begin entering your stats. Once you're on this page, you'll be able to see that you have tables 1, 2, 3, and then table 2 worksheet, which is a separate one. And they all say not started. As you complete them and save them, they will start turning green or red. And then you have the submit reports at the bottom whenever you're done. In this instance, we're going to go to table 1, membership. And we are going to see, here's 2020 values for last year. And these are 2021 values for this year. So we're going to complete the 2021. Number 1, this is the biggest question of the year. Why can't I change number 1? Number 1 cannot be changed because it's the membership information brought over from the previous year. So you began with 282 in 2020. You ended up with 287 members in 2020. So that has been brought over. So we are going to complete this information. And we are going to go down and we are going to say that we transferred in 3 people. And now we have 290 members for this year. Then we're going to go down and update the information here. So, and here. Yep. We're going to change this because I want to show you something. As you're going down, you can just keep updating the information all the way down. Then once you're done, you're going to hit save. There's a save button at the bottom and there's a save button at the top. It says your data was saved, but with errors. You can just hit OK. And then scroll to the top. And you're going to see the warnings. The warnings are there because I did not enter all the information. It's usually there because the numbers are off percentage-wise, not off, but changed by a great percentage, and we wanted explanations as to why. In red, it means that you have to actually fix something before you can submit the report. In this case, our problem is the gender total does not match our membership. So if we go back down, you will see the box in red. So if we change this to 110, we change this to not 110. And then we hit save again. Again, you're going to hit OK. You'll see that the red tab is gone. To put in an explanation as to why one of your a warning is up, you can just hit edit and then complete this information and hit update. Okay. You'll use the drop down here to switch between tables. If you go to table 2 worksheet, it's going to say, if you leave this page and did not click save, the information you entered will not be saved. It is very, very important you save the information. So there are a lot of warnings. So you hit OK. Okay, and if you have not saved, you're going to hit, back, you're going to hit the save button, and then you're going to try to move again. Table 2 worksheet is the expense calculations for line 48B. This information you will find on the expense calculator, and it lines up with all the questions. So W 1.1, 1.2A, 1.2B, it all lines up with the expense calculator. So you'll complete this information. You're going to hit save. And then once you go to table 2, you will see that in 48B, the information has been saved from that worksheet. 48B is always completed through the worksheet itself. So if you notice it's missing, you're receiving an error or a warning, please go to the worksheet and update the information there. Also, you'll see over here, you have the years. I think there's 20 years. Yep, there's 20 years here. If you want to go back and see what your stats were in 2010 or 2003, you can always pull that information up and run a report. It is important when completing your statistics for 2021 that the date is set to 2021. Okay, thank you. Dave?
All right. Thank you, Tanya.
Tanya, I'm sorry, there's a question.
Yes.
And this question comes from Oakdale Church, Christy Long. Our church has been gathering gender/ethnicity information. How do we complete the data fields? We used to make our best guess, but in the current social environment, we have not felt comfortable doing that. Oh, I'm sorry. It says their church has not been gathering that information.
Okay, so but they've completed the information in the past, right? Dave, do you have any good?
I do understand that some churches might be reluctant to actually poll their members, but this is definitely one area where we would definitely prefer that you take your best guess if you don't feel comfortable polling members. Diversity, especially in this day and age, is more important than it ever has been. And as I touched on before, the information that we gather helps us as a conference and as a denomination in many ways. So we want to make sure, one of the elements that we look at is how the diversity of our churches match up with the demographics of the surrounding area. So we definitely want to see that information. So again, we ask you to fill it out as accurately as you can. That would definitely be preferred to leaving it blank because that will then skew our numbers, especially if we're grouping those kind of numbers with other churches of your size. So again, do the best you can, do what you're comfortable with, but it definitely is important information. We do encourage you to enter that in.
a follow-up question. Since some of our churches are not in person, it's only online, we really don't have any way of knowing that information for this year. How do we address that?
Okay, so if it's regarding ethnicity, keep in mind, these numbers are not for the ethnicity of your worship attenders. These are actually members of your church. So even if you are worshiping online, the actual membership of your church should remain constant. So again, this is regardless of who is showing up on Sunday, either in your sanctuary or during online worship. This is membership ethnicity, not the worship attending ethnicity. So hopefully that answers your question. All right, anything else, Crystal? All right. Well, with that, we will jump back over into the PowerPoint. Thank you, Tanya, for walking through. I did see one thing. You don't have to change the screen, but at some of the fields, especially there's a field at the bottom of the worksheet. If it is a field that is flagged as being kind of an auto-calculated field, and you've entered all the information above it and you're expecting it to update, but it hasn't updated yet, just tab through the field that you're looking at, and that will trigger it to update. Sometimes it depends on the browser sometimes, but if you notice that you put 2 and 2 and it's not in the calculation screen does not equal 4, it still says 0. Just hit tab a couple more times and you'll see it update. We sometimes get calls from folks and they will not understand why the system is not working. It's just a matter of tabbing through, so keep that in mind. Okay, so with that, we'll jump back in. Okay, so table 1 discusses, again, all the membership and participation in various areas. We touched on this just a couple minutes ago, but we're looking at the membership profile of your church by race, by gender. And as Tanya demonstrated, the system will definitely flag if things do not add up correctly. So keep that in mind. Again, keep in mind that first field is a carryover from the previous year numbers. There is an area where you can correct reporting errors from the previous year. There's actually a spot where you can say, okay, last year we underreported, so we want to add this amount of members, or last year we overreported and we want to subtract these members. So all of that is in there. We also discuss professions of faith, reaffirmations of faith. All of that is covered in table 1. On participation and attendance, I would recommend in this area, some people will get tripped up because the wording of these questions is definitely important. Some of the questions will say, for example, how many classes do you have in a certain category or type of class? And then maybe one above or one below it might say, how many people are participating in those classes? So keep in mind that some of these are participation as opposed to the actual number of classes or number of programs in that specific category. In general, these questions for participation are set up so that you really should not be double counting people in either area. So for example, Sunday school has it broken out in age brackets. So that means you would not be recording the same people twice. And then keep in mind also, you will see, in addition to breakouts by number of classes and participation, then you will see questions that will say, okay, you've told us how many people participate in Sunday school, but then there's a question that says, okay, what's your average Sunday school attendance? And that's for the entire year. So just keep in mind those little kind of nuances of those questions, and so that you don't get tripped up and either over-report or under-report. And that's really the thing that trips up people more than anything. Next slide. Okay, so utility expense calculator. Tanya actually had that as part of her demonstration. about 10 years ago, we made the decision as a conference that we wanted to encourage churches to take full advantage of their building as an outreach tool for missional areas to serve the community and to help the community at large with hosting groups. So we realized that, especially for larger buildings, when you are doing that, obviously you have to heat or cool the building so that those folks are comfortable in your building while they're there. So that can end up being a large chunk of money that's dedicated to those activities. But before, we really had no way of breaking this out. So one of the resources that's available online is an Excel sheet. There's a screenshot of it here, and it will prompt you for the major areas of utility expenses. And this is going down the left-hand column there. It's electric, oil and gas, water and sewer, phone and internet. And it will then tally up. You're putting in the entire amount for the year. That will tally up for you. And then you will put in this total square footage of your building. And from that point, you will jump into the area below, and it's a large kind of a area where you can list as many rooms and organizations as you may have that's using the building. You can see the headings there, or you type in the organization or activity. It might be Alcoholics Anonymous group. You can put the room name in just to kind of help you track things. You might say room 114. You put in the square footage of room 114, and then you say, okay, this class meets for 3 hours a week. They meet, let's say, 48 weeks a year. So at that point, as soon as you tab out of that weeks per year field, because you've entered in the total utilities and the total square footage for your building, you will immediately see in that column on the right a figure that pops up that says, okay, based on this room and its square footage and the amount of usage, this much is going to be dedicated to utility expense. So you go through with that same method, going down through the page, adding in all the areas where your church is used for missional purposes. And you will see on the upper right-hand side, you will see the number 1, number 2, number 3 highest utility expense areas, and then all other missions. And you will see on the left-hand side of all of those columns, you see where it says box 1, box 2, box 3. These line up exactly with the worksheet on statistics. So we try to make this as easy as possible and straightforward as possible for you. Once you have completed this Excel sheet, you can print it out and go over into the statistical reporting system and type those numbers in verbatim. And that will give you the total utility expense for missional related purposes. Now, the next part is key. If you have, let's say you have $50,000 of operating expenses that you would normally report on your statistics on line 62. If your utility expense calculator says that out of that $50,000, if it comes up with a $3,000 total, instead of reporting $50,000 on table 2, you would reduce that by $3,000 and report $47,000. And the rest of that total would be the missional utility expenses. So because the operating expenses are used as part of your mission share calculations, that reduction will translate into a reduction in your mission share. So this is really important for a lot of churches. I know my church is one that seems like almost every night of the week there is some group meeting there, and it's a large building and those utility expenses can add up. So please take advantage of this, especially if your church is very active in the community and hosts lots of groups and missional related activities. And again, this can be groups, or if you have a soup kitchen, or I know my church has a winter relief operation that folks will come in and sleep in the fellowship hall. All of that time and all that square footage that's in use, the utilities associated with that can be deducted from your operating expenses, and therefore will help you to reduce your mission share. So please keep an eye out for that. Okay, so next table, table 2 is assets, debt, and expenses. Again, some of these lines are used in your mission share based calculations, and wanted to kind of stress here, as mentioned before, we do not apportion or calculate mission share based on expenses that are associated with mission programs. So again, I already told you about some, but nursery schools, preschools, daycare, soup kitchens. It doesn't have to be a Methodist group. Again, community groups such as AA, scouting, that type of thing, are all missional in nature, and we do not apportion or calculate mission share on those types of activities. So there are areas in Table 2 that are dedicated to missional expenses, direct expenses. And then there are also areas in Table 2 that are dedicated to the utility related expenses. But all of those, again, are outside of the calculations or outside of the numbers we use in our calculations for mission share. So keep that in mind. Another big thing is capital expenditures. Capital expenditures are large purchase items for maintenance, repairs, that type of thing. If you are painting your building, putting on a new roof, if you've had storm damage, you're putting in a boiler, these things that are outside of the normal year in, year out maintenance, but large, big ticket items. These are getting reported on line 63, 64, I believe. And it has a instruction there as to, we kind of try to list a lot of typical areas related to that. But because those are big ticket items, keep that in mind and report that in the right area, because this can dramatically impact your mission share calculation. And generally it's going to bump it way up. If you take a $30,000 roof repair and put it into your operating expenses, that's going to increase your mission share calculation. So keep that in mind. If you have a big ticket item, look for that area where you can report it outside of your normal operating expenses so that you don't overpay for mission share. Okay, on Table 2, what is included in the mission share calculation, we look at the base salary for pastors, deacons, and associate pastors. That is comprised of any other cash compensation areas that they're paid by your church. If you have completed our church conference form, you will see the breakout of what is generally considered to be cash compensation or salary. It could be, in addition to just base pay, it might be bonuses or gifts or reimbursements of family health premiums, anything that's outside of the individual healthcare premium. Excuse me, I'm gonna get a drink of water. And then we have a note here that says about 3 years ago, the denomination wanted to make sure that regardless of the source of the income, they wanted to make sure that churches were reporting the true amount of the compensation for the pastor. So some churches will receive support in the form of equitable compensation or other grants that is then used to pay the salary or maybe housing for the pastor. So if that is the case, make sure that regardless of the source of that money, that you're reporting the entire amount in the areas where it's requested. If it is an equitable compensation grant or another type of grant from the conference, there's an area to report that, and we will adjust your mission share calculation based on that amount. But we do ask that you actually report the true amount that is paid out or paid for the pastor on Table 2. So that said, one thing that we want to make sure you do not do is, you will see above Table 2, there's an area that talks about health and pension expenses. That should not be put into the salary for clergy and pastors, and that is typically a larger amount, so we want to make sure you do not add it in. That's a typical error that we see. And we also want to make sure, and this is another area that trips people up, if you are in a multi-point charge or a cooperative parish where you are sharing the compensation of a pastor who is going between 2 or 3 churches, the statistical amount that you put down as the actual amount that your church pays out for that pastor's compensation. Same goes for any other expense. We don't want to know the full amount of the expense that's shared amongst the churches. We want to know what you pay for your portion of that expense. We will see expenses where it might be a 3-point charge. Somebody's filling out statistics that says, oh, hey, Pastor Smith makes $40,000, so we're going to put $40,000. But maybe that one church is only paying $10,000 or $15,000 of that comp. So again, make sure it's what you are reporting that you paid from your church's bank account or checkbook. If you do have questions about the breakout of what gets reported where, one of the resources that's available on our website, there's a link to a resource that's actually produced by the United Methodist Church, and it will break out the typical areas of compensation and let you know what lines those end up being reported on in your statistical reports. And that link for that form is on our statistical reports webpage. Okay, so housing allowances. We know that there's two main areas where housing is paid, or the benefit of housing is provided to pastors. Either the church has a parsonage, or the pastor is provided a housing allowance where a portion of his total pay is designated as a housing allowance. So because there are two completely separate types of housing, the parsonage tends to be a lower cost. Of most churches will own their parsonage. Then the housing allowance, which especially nowadays with expenses going up, the housing allowances can definitely be higher than the total expense for the parsonage. So whether or not your pastor receives housing benefits via parsonage or via housing allowance, either of those areas should be reported where it says housing. So if you have a parsonage, all the expenses associated with the parsonage get reported on line 55. And if you have a housing allowance, the housing allowance itself gets reported there. So in order to have some parity between those two types of housing compensation, we have what we call a donut calculation, thus the graphic. And the calculation, thankfully, you don't need to know it, but we just want to let you know it's there, because we will have folks that say, hey, I feel like I'm being penalized because my parsonage expenses are only, say $8,000 a year, and or we give housing and it's $20,263, and this other church down the road has a parsonage, they only pay $9,000 for their expenses. So there's a breakdown here that shows you how the housing calculation is calculated for mission share calculations. And again, we show it to you here. I won't go into all the nitty-gritty of it, but it is to help, again, to have parity between the two types of housing compensation. And every year that there is a change in the minimum clergy compensation, we will update the calculation, and so that it kind of stays in lockstep with that. Okay, so there's another area on table 2 that's expenses. We do not want you to include any expenses that are associated with fundraising or a capital campaign. If you are, say you're putting an addition on your building and you're having a big kind of a kickoff for it, and you have a catered event for your church, and it's let's build the church up barbecue, and you spend $5,000 on this catered event and presentation all about the building, that is considered a capital campaign or fundraising expense, and that should not be included in your program expense for your church, where it would be part of your mission share calculation. It should be reported on its own line, and you'll see 63A will be labeled that way. And you can put expenses for supplies. If you hired a consultant, sometimes consultants are used to kind of help lay out the whole fundraising campaign. That would be a reasonable expense. If you rent a space to hold an event for the fundraiser, that type of thing, again, it's all put there. Do not put expenses, however, for just regular run-of-the-mill stewardship campaigns. Those are all included in your program cost area. Again, mailings and that type of thing. I'm sorry, I'm reading the wrong thing. So do include, again, consultant costs and mailings and special services in there. And I think the next slide. Yep, as opposed to just your kind of day in, day out stewardship campaign costs. So sorry about the confusion there. So another area where we see some issues with reporting is in and out costs. And this is where I like to kind of look at it as a bucket illustration. If you have, say for Rock or Wave or whatever the program happens to be, say your church wants to have 10 people go to an event. You want to reserve the tickets for it. So you go out and you spend, say, $100 per ticket. For 10 people, you spend $1,000 to buy tickets to this event. That expense now is $1,000. Probably going to be reported in program expenses. However, you are asking people to pay you then for those tickets. So people, as they book the tickets and reserve spots, they pay you back for those tickets. So at the end of the day, you've put out the $1,000 up front, and your church members have then paid you back for those tickets. So make sure when you're reporting program expenses, that when you have that type of thing in the mix, make sure you're including you're reporting the net of the in and out amounts for whatever that happens to be. Don't just report the $1,000 that it costs you to buy those tickets. If that amount was offset by reimbursements from your members, make sure, again, you report the net. Same thing for if you have a church supper and it costs you $1,000 to have some catered food brought in, but you ask for donations and for the meal and you get, say, $200 in donations, make sure that that expense for that dinner is reported as $800, not the $1,000 up front. So again, some of these programs, depending on the nature of it, can be expensive. So make sure that you're including the net, not the actual gross cost of the activity. Preschool and after school programs. Again, this is in the missional expense areas. Make sure that you are breaking out the expenses of the preschool and childcare programs from your typical program and operating expenses, because that entire program is a missional expense and it should be outside of the operating and program costs for the church. Some of these operations can be very large and very expensive. So we always suggest that these programs are broken out completely and not reported and mixed in with statistics. Same goes for compensation for staff and that type of thing. If you have a staff member whose time is allocated to the preschool, make sure that the expense of that staff member is not reported on your statistics underneath church staff, because again, all of that time is spent in the missional related or programs or community service activities. So keep that in mind if you have that type of operation. Make sure you're reporting it correctly so that you're not apportioned on that expense. Okay, I touched on this. Oh, there we go. So I touched on this already with the expense calculator. The use of the church building by a non-Methodist group, or it could be a Methodist group, is going to increase the expenses of the church because of the utility expenses. So again, our general principle is to not apportion this type of activity. And as I touched on before, that utility expense calculator is going to be of great benefit to your church, especially if you operate and host lots of those activities. And the note below might seem a little bit confusing. It says compensation and benefits are not program or operating expenses. But you would be surprised. There's a line for staff compensation and benefits, and then there's a line for program and a line for operating expenses. One of the common errors we see is that because the thinking is, okay, this person is just the organist. Sometimes people will say, well, you know, organ music, that's part of our program. So that person's salary is put in the total salary for the church staff, but it's also included again in a program expense. So make sure you don't double count any type of expense. If it's an expense, it's reported in one area, one time only. And that is always true, and it will definitely trip you up if you are double reporting an expense in an area that is part of the mission share calculation. So make sure that you're not including compensation and benefits in lines that are not labeled that way.
Dave, we just got a question in reference to capital expenditures. The question comes from Sandy Russell. During this pandemic, we've added TV screens, video cameras, and computers, hardware and software, plus consultant fees. Is this considered a capital expense?
Depending on the amount of the expense, my guess is that it would be. Obviously, these are generally big ticket items. I believe it has a breakdown in the line instructions, but if it's something that's not a typical expense, so if it's not an expense the church is generally incurring every year, and it's something that I think, I believe in the statistical instructions, I think it's something over that generally is over like $1,500. Yes, that would be included as a capital expense. I mean, AV systems can run $10,000, $20,000, $50,000 sometimes, depending on the church. So because that's not a ongoing annual expense, that would be a capital expense. Now, the flip side of that is if you spend all of that money you put in the AV system, that's the capital expense, but then kind of the ongoing expenses for that. So say if you have a $100 a month subscription for live streaming your service, that would be something where you would probably include in your program expenses on the ongoing basis. But again, the actual installation of all of that, and again, having a consultant come in to advise you on what to get, how to put it in, that type of thing is very typical. So make sure that that's kind of all included in the project expenses when you start down that road. The consultant to tell you how to put it in, all the prep work, licenses, fees, and then the actual installation work and that type of thing all should be kind of tracked, so that when you go to report your statistics, those can be broken out and recorded in the capital expense line.
Thank you, Dave.
Sure. Okay, so going to the mission share calculation specifically, it is all of the expenses on table 3 that begin with line 53, base compensation, 55, housing and benefits, accountable reimbursements, cash allowances for the clergy, salary and benefits for all other church staff and diaconal ministers, and then program expenses, which would be like Sunday school, materials. Again, the streaming services for your worship service might be there, pulpit supplies, that type of thing. And then line 62 is all the expenses that are associated with actually keeping the building up and running, be it office supplies, copy paper, utilities, you name it. There's a little note there. Most of you are aware now because it's been a couple of years, but lines 54, 58, and 59 used to be some more breakouts within those categories, but they're no longer used. But those lines that you see there, just that 53 through 62 are the only lines that we include in the mission share calculations. Some of you who have been Methodist for quite some time may remember there was a time long ago where the calculation for mission share apportionment actually factored in some other things like membership and that type of thing. We have not used that type of formula for a long time. So as of right now, for at least the last 10 years, 10, 11 years, everything is based on expenses and everything is based on these specific expenses. So our mission share formula, the mission share base is the total of all of those expenses that were on that previous slide. So they are all totaled up and used as the mission share base. The benevolence factor is the percentage of that base that's applied to calculate the mission share. Our current benevolence factor for 2022 is 17.55%. Thankfully, our CFA has been extremely diligent, along with our leadership, in constantly pushing to lower that down. Years ago, it was up above 20%, and we have lowered it as time has gone on. Our ongoing goal is to get it down as close to about 10% of your total operating expenses as possible, so like a tithe. But the reason there is a difference between that 10% and the 17.55% is touched on earlier. We don't really include all of your expenses in the mission share. It's just a subset of it. So that mission share base is then factored by the benevolence factor 17.55, and that is the total mission share for the church. When we're looking at our budgeting, another key metric is the collection rate. So this is if the church is apportioned $10,000, if they pay us $10,000 for that year, that is considered 100% payment or 100% collection rate. So when we're looking at the collection rate for all of our churches, that average is the collection rate, and obviously that impacts our income. Our connection is very strong. We have been extremely blessed and fortunate over the years that our collection rate is extremely high compared to other conferences. This really benefits our churches because it helps us to keep our benevolence factor low, and it keeps a level of equity for all of our churches. And we are still, even during times of COVID and some stress on our system, our collection rates, because of our blessings here at the conference and our dedication from our churches to the connectional system, we've been really blessed in this area. There are some conferences that are down in the 50 to 60% collection rate range, and that obviously can create very intense problems for the equity of the system and the budgeting of the conference. So again, we've been very blessed and fortunate in this area. So in looking at the total overall calculation, again, the base multiplied by the benevolence factor multiplied by the collection rate is what we use to budget. And this is our kind of our total projected mission share income for the year. And we take that number then, and obviously, as I mentioned before, we're looking at that against the costs of our mission programs and benefits that we are bringing to the churches. And that is how, like any other agency or company, we're looking at expenses versus income, and we're making the right decisions to try to match those up. Okay, so table 3 is definitely the most straightforward of all the tables. It is all income related. There is nothing in this table that is used directly in the mission share calculation. There is only one part of that table that is used as an offset, and I'll talk about that in a second. But the main part of the table is recording the various ways that the church is receiving income from its members. It discusses the receipts from members who have already filled out a pledge, receipts from people who haven't filled out a pledge, but they're definitely an identified giver. You know who they are. They're putting it in an envelope, or they're putting a check in the plate that has their name in it, where you can tie it to a specific person. And then receive from unidentified givers, that would be any type of receipts, just kind of cash in the offering plate, anonymous donation, you name it, where you can't really tie it to a specific person. Beyond that, beyond the plate income per se, there are areas where you can record any kind of interest or dividends. The key with that is if you have, say you have an endowment fund, you've been blessed to have an endowment fund, and the interest or dividend in that fund, say, goes up 10% that year. That amount should only be recorded as income unless if you take that money out of that investment and use it for your day in, day out budget for your church. we often get questions from people. They'll say, hey, we have a $50,000 endowment. It went up $10,000. Where do we report that $10,000? And my first question is, well, did you spend it? If you didn't spend it, the only area where you would report it is this. There's a spot on table 2 where it will say the total value of all your liquid assets. If you reported $50,000 the previous year and it's gone up to $60,000, you'll put $60,000 this year. Again, if you didn't touch any of that gain, if you didn't take that gain out and put it into the coffers of the church for your budget, your spending plan, it does not get reported as income. So keep that in mind. So sale of church assets is pretty self-explanatory. Any type of building use, fees and rentals, that gets reported there. We will often get questions. They'll say, hey, you guys give us a benefit or a deduction or an offset, whatever you want to call it, for the utility related fees for missional activities. What happens if we're charging, let's say it's an AA group, and you charge them rent for the use of your building throughout the year? Doesn't that kind of negate the missional use offset? And the answer there is no. You actually get the best of both worlds. You can charge whatever you feel is reasonable for the rental of the space. The income that is brought in for that rental is reported on table 3. And then if it is a missional or community benefit type of activity, you can reduce the expenses of hosting that activity using the utility expense calculator. So keep in mind that neither of those kind of things offset each other. So fundraising and other sources might just be special fundraising. There's a second section for capital income. Again, this is large capital campaigns. There's an area for memorials and endowments and bequests that you may have received throughout the year. There's a special area for recording the income from UMW and UMM projects. And there's also an area for general advances and other special giving. Before I jump off of that slide, there is an area, I mentioned it before, this definitely came into more of a focus during COVID. There's an area on table 3 where you can report the income received from a PPP grant, and it can be a PPP grant, or it could be, say, a state or local government grant. There's 3 types of grants or income sources that can be reported at the bottom of table 3. One is an equitable comp category. The other is a connectional receipt. So if there's a grant program that the BWC is putting forth and you're awarded that grant, there's a separate line for that. And then there's a third line for all other institutional grants outside of the connection. That's where you would report your PPP money, any sort of other benefits. I know some churches will receive benefits for hosting a soup kitchen or a program for the hungry. They might get that from their county or the state. That's where that would be reported. And again, make sure you're reporting that on its own, the line that says institutional and other grants, and not putting it in the connectional area. As I mentioned before, if you're reporting a grant in the equitable compensation or in the connectional or BWC area, you will see on your verification notice and on your final mission share notice, you will see where that amount is taken away from the total mission share base. Our thought on that overall is that those funds, grant funds, are made available due to the mission share income from our churches. So because that's the source of the funding, we don't want to then assess mission share on the receipt of those funds from the conference. So again, make sure when you're reporting the expense, you report all of the expense regardless of the source of the funds used to fund it. And then you will report the income on table 3 in the appropriate area. And if that income is a connectional based program, or if it's an equitable comp based program, we will make an allowance in the calculation to reduce your total mission share base by that amount. Next slide. Yep.
Where do we report direct contributions to a building account or a cemetery?
Direct contribution building account. Sorry, my computer's popping up. Okay. So I guess it depends on the structure of the church. If it's a building account, it probably should be, it depends on the source of it. There's definitely some instructions on the table 3 table guide that kind of breaks out lots of examples of the various types of income. So I would encourage you to take a look at those. It probably will address the area that you're talking about. If it still does not, contact your district administrator, and they will pass it along to me, and I can kind of confer and see the type of program that it is. But generally it's just an operating income. But take a look at the table 3 instructions. You'll probably find the correct spot for it there.
Thank you.
All right. So resources, as discussed before, our statistical reporting page has all of the resources that we mentioned tonight, and some more that probably we didn't mention. Definitely make sure that you download the GCFA instructions that Tanya walked you through, that walk you through setting up the account. The main question we get asked every year is, what's the password that I use to set up my account? That information is in that resource. And if you didn't hear it, it's Stats 2021. But make sure you download that resource, especially if you're new to the reporting process. If you're a new committee member and you've been charged with reporting, a lot of the frequently asked questions that you will run into are there. And in addition, make sure, frankly, regardless of how many times you've done it, make sure you download the table instructions, because there is for each line, there's a lot of information that's included. You will notice on the front page of that resource, because of COVID, and there were some variations in the reporting that have to do with online worship, that have to do with the receipt of PPP funds and the forgiveness of funds, how things are reported. There is on the front page a what's new section that highlights areas, and most of these are COVID related, but it will highlight what's new and what pages that those new issues or explanations are located on. And we've also highlighted things in yellow to kind of draw your attention to it. So again, that's the table instructions that are on the resource. And again, if you want to get help, if you run into issues, we're definitely here to help you out. If the resources aren't helping you out, or you just feel more comfortable asking somebody, we do ask that you reach out to your district administrators first. There's 8 of them and there's 1 of me. And so usually you will get a quicker response if you can email them your question. They know the answers to most. And if you stump them, they will come to me. And if it stumps me, I will go to my boss, Paul Eichelberger, who's our treasurer and chief operating officer. So keep that in mind, and try to kind of at least get into the system and get an overview of it sooner than later. As you can imagine, we get most of our questions in the last probably 2 to 3 days. So we tend to get overwhelmed as the deadline approaches. So try to at least give an overview and see of everything to see if anything's stumping you early. And we would greatly appreciate it if you are asking your questions in early January versus late January. So please keep that in mind. Also on the forum, there's some resources for you will see how to use EZRA to pull multiple year reports for your church. This is really beneficial especially for new pastors and new committee chairs. There is an area of EZRA where you can look at 10-year graphs of your key kind of metrics for your church, whether it's membership or professions of faith, Sunday school attendance, that type of thing. It's a great resource that's actually available all year long in the EZRA system, but we try to highlight this time of year when everybody is kind of in the system, so that they can at least take a look and print out what's available, because it's very useful for new people in the church to kind of look and see the overall trends of the church. Next slide. So that's all we have. Again, we appreciate you taking the time to learn about the system. If you have issues with the recording of PPP and some COVID-related issues, again, keep an eye out for the areas that we've highlighted in the table instructions. And because we went through a lot of this last year and we kind of fine-tuned some of the processes and instructions. So keep that in mind. We realized that although the first draw of PPP was back in 2020, there was a secondary program that some people took advantage of in 2021, and there was also some governmental programs as well. So keep an eye out for that type of instruction and guidance if that describes your situation. So that's all I have. I appreciate your time. Tanya, are you?
Yes. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for being here and sitting through with us. And we hope you have a great evening. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Crystal.
Night, everybody.